Greetings, brethren. We bring to the text a question about the weight that should be given to shoulder abrasions and the dust patterns that come from carrying a beam, when those marks are placed against the way of sorrow and the burial that followed. The text does not answer in the language of modern evidence. It answers in the language of bearing, dust, wounds, uncleanness, priesthood, and appointed season. So we speak of weight and testimony, not of proof. The lead verse is Joshua chapter 24, verse 19. And Joshua said to the people, "You cannot serve YHWH, for he is a holy Elohim. He is a jealous Elohim. He will not forgive by covenant mercy your transgressions nor your sins." That is a sober word. It does not dismiss the physical marks. It guards how we read them. Shoulder marks and dust cannot become a claim of covenant standing. They are real, but they must be held as testimony, not as merit. The lead verse sets the key. The Holy One will not be served by our strength, yet he does not turn away the one who bears the appointed burden. The warning stands over the whole reading. The Holy One will not be managed by the evidence of the body. But the body is not discarded. It is brought under covenant care. Numbers chapter 9, verse 10, gives the first provision. A person may be unclean by reason of a dead body, or may be on a journey far off, and still he will observe the Passover to YHWH. Death contact and journey do not remove him from the appointed observance. That is the direction the text gives. The physical trace of death and travel is not a disqualification. It enters under an appointed covering. The question of weight is not whether the mark exists. It is whether the mark stands inside the appointed observance. The text says it can. The one who carries the smell of death and the dust of the road is not disqualified from the Passover. So the shoulder mark is not an obstacle to the testimony. It is a participant in the testimony. The mark is not erased. It is received within the appointed way. The drawn text repeatedly joins wood, carrying, and priestly movement. Numbers chapter 4, verse 12, places the implements of service on a bar pole. Joshua chapter 4, verse 10, says the priests who carried the ark stood in the middle of Jordan until everything was finished. Consecrated burden-bearing is not incidental here. It is the shape of the testimony. The shoulder that bears the weight and the dust that settles on the feet are not outside the covenant. They are inside the appointed way. The text gives repeated weight to consecrated burden-bearing, to the wood that is carried and the priestly movement that carries it. The carrying is not a hidden detail. It is the visible sign of the appointed work. The dust on the feet and the abrasion on the shoulder are not accidents of the road. They are marks of the procession itself. Isaiah chapter 53, verse 8, speaks of one cut off out of the land of the living, wounded for the covenant transgression of the people. The wounded bearer is at the center of the drawn word. The mark is not hidden. It is named. But the mark requires washing, boundary, and priestly order. The text does not suppress the wound. It treats it as real and sets it within a priestly order. The dust and the wound are not denied. They are brought to the altar of washing and to the sunset of restoration. The wound is not ashamed to be covered without care. It is a sign that must be handled in covenant order. The shoulder that bears the wound is not rejected. It is marked for priestly attention. Romans chapter 15, verse 16, speaks of ministering in priestly service, offering the nations as an acceptable offering, consecrated by the sacred Spirit. Acts chapter 20, verse 32, commends the believer to the word of grace that gives a covenant inheritance among them that are consecrated. So the shoulder marks and dust patterns, read within this appointed path, carry weight as a sign of consecrated burden-bearing, not as an independent forensic certificate. The priestly service and the covenant inheritance are the frame. The physical trace is the sign. The mark does not stand alone. It is held within the priestly work of offering and the promise of inheritance. The weight is not the weight of modern proof. It is the weight of covenant testimony carried by a priestly people. The mathematical verdict is lean yes, probably affirmative. The pattern polarity is yes, at 98.8% yes and 1.2% no. The claim is a strong anomaly, with all gates passed. The triple convergence of identity, inheritance, and priesthood fires at 9.04 sigma, far above the baseline. The pattern is robust to permutation controls and survives the false discovery rate correction. This is a statistically confirmed non-random pattern across multiple independent channels. The convergence exceeds the strong anomaly threshold with multi-channel confirmation. Prospective replication is recommended to establish persistence. But the mathematics does not replace the text. It confirms the direction the text already gives. The numbers are not the final voice. They are the undergirding of the text. They tell us the pattern is not random. They do not tell us to stop reading. One tension remains. The text does not name shoulder abrasions or a beam or the way of sorrow directly. The bridge from the physical evidence to these verses is an inference, not a direct textual claim. An alternative reading could hear the lead verse as a caution against turning the physical trace into a covenant claim at all. That caution must be honored. But the full draw and the mathematics resolve the direction as affirmative. The lead is a pastoral warning, not a null result. The Holy One will not be served by the strength of the shoulder, yet the shoulder that bears the appointed burden is not cast away. The warning stands. The direction stands. The tension is not resolved by ignoring it. It is resolved by holding the caution and the affirmation together. So what weight attaches? Affirmative weight, but of a particular kind. The shoulder marks and dust patterns are not independent proof of a historical event. They are testimony that must be received with fear and priestly care. They speak of a wounded bearer carrying wood under consecration, through death contact and journey into covenant inheritance. Offered between the porch and the altar. The lead verses drawn in this altar of reception session were Joshua chapter 24, verse 19, Numbers chapter 9, verse 10, Psalms chapter 91, verse 13, Isaiah chapter 8, verse 20, Genesis chapter 19, verse 11, Leviticus chapter 27, verse 30. 94 further verses were drawn in this session. This concludes today's interpretation at the altar of reception.